ships. That is such an investment. That is such an investment for Leta that he has now lost. Now his command center is in jeopardy. He's going to be forced to repair that. He's going to try to run around trying to harass the 10 o'clock. Not going to be far too successful there, I believe. Fantasy, I believe, just with taking down those dropships, is going to take command of this game. He's going to have more forces on the ground, going to be able to control, going to be a lot more maneuverable. We're going to try to attack the 10 o'clock position, but our dropships coming in. Going to drop outside. Oh, SCV's being moved off the line to engage. Goliaths and tanks coming down to defend. Mines going off. And now Leta's forces are all cleaned up. I believe Fantasy lost a few more SCVs than he should have, really. Which will still manage to come inside and finish off the rest. The SCV's all gone, interestingly enough. That's kind of bad. He moved off his SCVs to try to engage the tanks. Something I believe he shouldn't actually have done. Tried to escape them or force them into a corner where the tanks couldn't engage them. Still reception a little bit bad. I apologize about that. These things happen and you can't always help them. Still, Fantasy with 5 dropships at this point really just going to be able to completely beat down on Leta. Just in case he decides to take advantage here. We're going to see who he tries to drop onto Leta. I think Leta's main could be rather vulnerable, so he might actually be able to drop onto the production line. Fantasy at this point with 2 upgrades. Leta still with no upgrades for Leta. This of course means that the tanks of Fantasy are going to be able to kill the tanks of Leta in one shot less, and this is going to give him... That was already possible at the 1-0 upgrade, but Leta has no such answer. Fantasy is going to be able to kill Leta in one shot less, and the Leta is going to be able to kill Fantasy's tanks, and this is such a critical thing. Fantasy now just running around, dropping ever, cleaning up forces that Leta has on the right side of the map. We're going to see what actually tries to go for the 5 o'clock at this point. That is rather long. There's one single turn as well as a few tanks. There is one Wraith there, an attack from distance. Leta does position not defendable at all. Leta just in a horrible position, trying to reinforce at the left side with some forces. Should be able to clean this up. He has the vultures for it. Fantasy, however, should be able to barrel down on the right side and completely clean up the bases that Leta has there. Leta's desperately trying to counter the fact that Fantasy has bases everywhere. SCV's again be forced to pull off the line to try to engage, but the vultures blocking in. Dropships coming in late. The SCVs are all going to go down, so Fantasy coming in late, but it's still going to be able to defend that base. Oh, beautiful mines coming in from both players. Leta doing a pretty good job with mines there, cleaning up some forces. Both players with beautiful mines. But Leta is in trouble. You can tell on his face. He knows he's in a little bit of trouble. He's not really in a good economic position here. Pardon there, sip of water. And Fantasy just slowly attacking the 5 o'clock base. Also has gotten his 9 o'clock now. One base over Leta, I believe, even though this position at the 10 o'clock not really mining a lot. Leta again pushing in dropships onto a lot of Goliaths. Not going to be able to drop actually does have enough tanks to drop into this position. Is going to be able to clean up, but Fantasy has an instant reaction. Every action has a reaction. Dropping down dropships at the 10 o'clock right into the 5 o'clock, I'm sorry, right into the 5 o'clock. He's going to start attacking that, showing that. And the opposite, Leta is attacking the 9 o'clock. He's actually going to be able to clean that up. So both players running around inside. I think Fantasy still has a little bit of an advantage due to the amount of damage he's done to Leta comparatively. Leta not actually going to be able to take down the 9 o'clock. Did clean up most of the SCVs more likely, but not going to be able to do too much because he had no Goliaths in the group to attack the CC at air, and Fantasy instantly has tanks and Goliaths as reinforcements going to start to defend that base. So at this point, it's a gas war, really. A base war, a gas war. Who has the more gas, who can continue producing tanks, who can continue producing dropships. That's all it's going to come down to. Fantasy has one single Goliath attacking the CC of Leta's at the 5 o'clock base. Leta moving around with a lot of forces. At this point, not really much mining going on anywhere. The mains of both players at this point should be completely dead. The natural's still mining, and all the other bases, of course, also mining. Leta is just barely going to be able to fly his CC to safety. Nothing too much going to happen. Leta's finally reestablished a little bit, a decent number of dropships. There's 4 dropships at this point. Thinking of dropping past these temples, I believe. Has those dropships running around. He, is actually going to drop past them rather than sieging the temples and completely taking out. Is actually going to try to attack. Fantasy has a few forces there, though. Scan going off. I believe that was Fantasy's. Try to spot them down. Force that Leta has, whether he says to siege. He is actually going to siege. He is going to siege on the line, yes. He's going to start to siege just past his inside 11 o'clock. try to put on defensive position. Now it's all going to come down to who utilizes dropships better. Fantasy has a few more dropships, who's going to be able to utilize those better. If he manages to catch sieging forces of Leta's off guard, of course, and I mean not just some forces, all of the forces, that's going to be it. That's obvious. I think at this point, Leta, though, not going to let that happen. He has a lot of glass with all of his tank groups, always there to help defend. And I don't think Fantasy will want to sacrifice the huge number that Leta sacrificed. Leta now actually going to go towards the 9 o'clock position. Has a lot of Goliaths there. Should be able to clean up that position. We're going to see what they actually managed to take out the SCV alongside, CC alongside, I'm sorry. Does take out the CC with Goliaths as it was floated away. Instantly going to load up again. And Fantasy has meanwhile established the 3 o'clock base. Leta lost his inside. Not yet reestablished. Not floated his CC back to his inside 5 o'clock, interestingly enough. Has finished repairing it a long time ago, really not paying attention there. Has a lot of idle SCVs that were repairing it, also just trying to focus on the action so far, not really microing as always. You should be able to. Has a lot of Goliath to support the 3 tanks he has dropships moving in even close again. We're going to see whether he has enough forces there to help. Fantasy's definitely not going to risk attacking those forces just outside the temples. He's going to get like 2-3 of his dropships killed before they come in close. Goliath with champ boosters, of course, so very dangerous. Gonna be able to attack forces at range. We're again moving in with even more forces with his dropships. Just at this point, this is kind of not the kind of, really more of a stale, but Fantasy gonna go drop on a lot of Leta's forces. Leta did manage to pick some of those up though, so not gonna do much. Losing one of his dropships on the way though. This is very, very standard TVT though, as you can see. Tanks, Goliaths, dropships. This is the kind of TVT that most players hate, really. Most players, and I believe most players, definitely most commentators and most watchers, really hate this kind of game of TVT. Fantasy gonna instantly put forces down on this 10 o'clock, moving also forces down on the right side, trying to catch Leta off guard, trying to take out some of his forces. Leta does have his dropships in position, but not going to be able to drop on Fantasy, though. Fantasy has his own dropships to help support, putting Goliaths and tanks at the forefront position to just continue putting pressure on Leta. Leta now in a lot of trouble. Now his inside 5 o'clock is also in jeopardy. Probably going to lose his 4 o'clock position. Now inside 5 o'clock also in a lot of jeopardy. Leta is going to try to collect some of his forces back. Scans going off for Fantasy to spot the forces there at the left side. Fantasy losing several dropships, though. Really should not have done that. The middle. I'm not really sure of the dropship count at this point. Fantasy almost mining out his natural. Leta at this point has completely mined out his natural. Just now mining at the lower left and mining. I know he's mining on the inside 5 and not sure about the 4 o'clock. He's not really been able to establish that. Fantasy, I believe, at this point has a base advantage, going around, cleaning out all the forces everywhere. Let's see, Fantasy probably mining. He's still mining his natural a little bit, I believe. He's probably mining his 1 o'clock. I know he's mining at the 10 o'clock position, also mining at the 3 o'clock. So Fantasy is a base over. And Leta now going to be in a little bit of trouble. Fantasy has a lot of tanks barreling down on his economic position. Leta's going to have to be forced. Oh, he's 9 o'clock. Is so much jeopardy. Fantasy barreling down so many tanks. Is going to be able to take out the CC. Doesn't even float it away. Knows that it's lost. Leta now with the sizable force trying to move back to reestablish and reinforce, but far too late. Fantasy taking down that 9 o'clock base. Gonna siege up, get a lot of vultures running right into him. We're gonna see whether they can have enough forces to block that. Vultures trying to plant out mines, not being too effective. Leta moving in with more tanks. Gonna start sieging up against those forces of Fantasies there. Fantasy really just both players losing forces left and right, but I think Fantasy just has the upgrades are really coming through for him. The bases are really coming through for him. That huge loss of Leta's of the 7 dropships early on really not paying off, really in a bad position. Fantasy now going to siege up just past the middle with a lot of tanks. SCVs being pulled off the lines, tanks de-sieging. We're going to see what the Goliaths are going to come in to play with those dropships now to start attacking the CCs at a distance. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. A lot of Goliaths, the Cs are going to be in a lot, not going to be able to do too much to defend. So one tank goes down there to a mine. The CC's still in a lot of danger due to those. Yeah, CC is going to go down. There's still one command center floating into the 4 o'clock, but that's could actually also be in a lot of jeopardy if Fantasy decides to focus down a little bit. But now he really has to react to the forces coming in from Leta. Leta trying to reinforce with some tanks. I think Fantasy, he actually moved back with some of his forces closer to 5 o'clock. So he is probably going to lose his 2 tanks. He has a 1 CC repairing. Physics lab coming in. Physics lab going to come in for Fantasy. So Fantasy going to do something funky. That is battle cruisers, for those that don't know. He does have the 1 single starport. He's probably going to start producing that from 1 push. And GG coming in from Leta. Yeah, no chance at that point. Just did not have the ground forces, did not have the aerial forces, did not have the economy. Fantasy just completely dominating him there, really. The game could have gone on. Game honestly could have gone on for another 10 minutes, but it just would have been a slow death to Leta, and Leta knew this, and he decided to GG. So he's going to go on to the move on to the losers match, while Fantasy moves on to the winners match, where he'll face off against either Jaedong or Movie, which is coming up next. GG guys, Ryan Shin out. Thanks for listening.